Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Cisco Optics Podcast, where we talk about pluggable optics for networks. After you plug the optic into the switch, router, or server, you're not done. You still have to plug in a fiber optic cable. What does this fiber cable infrastructure look like? It's a lot more sophisticated than you might imagine. This is episode 11, and we continue a conversation with Brian Kelly of Panduit. I've worked with Brian for a number of years because Cisco and Panduit have basically the same customers, even though we don't make the same products. Cisco is a network gear provider, and Panduit is a fiber cable infrastructure provider. You need both the hardware and the fiber cable to complete your network. In this third part of our 6-part conversation, we hear all about optical insertion loss and the importance of cleaning fiber connectors. Brian L. Kelly joined Panduit in 2012. In 2014, he joined corporate R&D as a solution architect. Prior to joining Panduit, he worked for 14 years in the telecommunications and data center co-location industries. Currently, Brian manages Panduit's network architecture team, which develops reference architecture content for the data center and enterprise businesses. In addition, he manages the Panduit Labs network, which provides secure connectivity and resources to their labs in Tinley Park, Illinois. Brian has written well over 20 technical papers that have been published on the Panduit website as well as partner websites. Brian owns a bachelor's degree from Illinois State University and a master's degree in business administration from Keller Graduate School of Management. If that doesn't mean expert, I don't know what does. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast. It may show up as the Cisco Podcast Network, which has other great podcast series as well. Check out our blog at blogs.cisco.com and search on hashtag Cisco Optics Blog, all one word, no hyphen and no spaces. You'll find podcast notes and links there too. For our YouTube playlist, go to youtube.com and search on Cisco Optics. And for product information, go to cisco.com/go/optics. And now, join me as I talk with Brian Kelly. So one other thing that just makes it even harder, I think, is optical insertion loss. Yeah. So probably more so with multi-mode links. So I know that there are certain, optical, when we define the specs for the transceivers, a lot of times we try to align, or most of the time, we try to align with standards as much as possible.
Absolutely, yeah.
For interoperability. And IEEE, for some of the higher speed multi-mode standards, like let's take SR4 for example, at say 100 gig.
Yeah,
I think the maximum insertion loss is only like a couple of or maybe 3 dB.
Yeah, I think it's 3 dB.
So how realistic is it that with the number of patch panels and fiber connections involved in a real data center link between two SR4 transceivers, how realistic is it to stay within that 3 dB budget?
Yeah, so again, it's kind of a sliding scale. So like at 3 dB, you might be able to only get 150 meters or 100 meters. So there's a lot of things that can create insertion loss. I mean, back in the day, 10 gig. You never worried about, I think it was 6 dB or something like that. It was very high. 1 gig and 10 gig, like the insertion loss really wasn't even in the thought process. But insertion loss is created by a lot of different factors. Multiple patch cords. Anytime that you have a patch panel and those fibers align, like I kind of mentioned before, there's insertion loss. And a lot of times people would have maybe 3 or 4 different patch panels in a channel to make the connections. And basically what that allows for is a lot of like moves, adds, and changes. The ability to move a connection from one area to another very simply. Which it provides a lot of flexibility, but also creates a lot of insertion loss. So as we get into these higher speeds, you kind of have to engineer your links a little bit more. And basically, that's just making a connection that you've really considered to optimize the insertion loss. But insertion loss can be, caused by multiple patch cord connections, low quality fiber connections, connections that weren't installed correctly. And then one that people don't pay much attention to is dirty connectivity. So like the
Oh
face of
yeah.
the fiber is dirty because it's had exposure to dust or it touched your finger. So like, fiber companies take a lot of care to make sure that you have dust caps on your fiber when you get them, and that really you should just open it just before you're going to plug it in.
So
And not just leave it open to the air.
what's your experience of how well people on average consider the cleanliness of the fiber surfaces?
On a scale of 1 to 10, I would give it a 2. People are terrible with it. I mean, and it's one of those things that it makes such a huge difference, and people just do not pay much attention to it, and it's a really big deal.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's an education deal. I really think that people don't understand how fiber works, and it's basically like, think about if you're wearing, say sunglasses, and you smeared grease all over it, you can't see very well.
I'm just
And that's what
trying to
happened.
imagine what situation that would happen, like if you're at a barbecue or something, and
Yeah. You dipped your hand in the oil and then rubbed it on your eyes, like. Yeah, no, but I mean, that's kind of the same way. Or like if your glasses get fogged up real bad, like you can't see. And it's the same thing with fiber. Like if it gets fogged up by any type of dirtiness or any type of, contaminant like that, it's going to affect how the light passes through.
but do you think people are
And
they're just not informed? Like,
I think it is. We actually, one of the guys that I work with has been on a campaign to talk about fiber cleanliness. He actually did a few videos about it. It's pretty funny. I'll see if I can find them and send you the links.
We'll put that in the podcast notes too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're really fun. They're kind of funny, but they're so true. Like people just don't. We had a customer a few years ago. I won't name any names, but they returned a sizable amount of fiber, but it was because their installers were not skilled installers, and like 99% of the fiber was just dirty.
And you actually could detect the dirt?
Yeah, we actually have a tool that when returns come in, we can test the fiber, and it's almost like a microscope that looks at the end of the fiber, and it was like almost all of them were contaminated of one sort or another.
So could
And
you
like if you put
see
your
a
finger on
fingerprint?
yeah, you can see like dirt or fingerprint, like grease or whatever, like sweat. I mean,
So you could
anything you
identify
could
who did
really.
it then,
Yeah,
in theory.
like took a DNA sample off. Yeah, it's funny. But yeah, we're actually, that's one of the things that we're trying to innovate around. So, be looking in the near future for some products from Panduit on that.
Now, is this more of an issue with MPO than LC?
Yeah, it's harder because MPO has got 12 fibers. So you may have one fiber that has a piece of dust on it and the other ones are fine, but that's going to affect your connectivity. And it's harder to clean an MPO than it is an LC, because an MPO is kind of a flat face, and it's just, you have to have a more specialized tool to do it. Well, you really have to have a specialized tool to do either one, but the specialized tool for LCs is far more common than it is for MPO.
But once you have the specialized tool, is it any more? Does it require any more dexterity or anything, or is it just a matter of getting the right tool?
It's really, well, first of all, it's about having the tool, which a lot of people don't, the cleaning tools. But generally, if you're pretty disciplined about your your connectivity with your fiber, like connecting it very shortly after you pull it out of the package and take the dust cap off and plug it in a transceiver, most of the time you're going to be fine. It's what happens is people take the caps off, they may hang them, out and they're sitting on a, say like a door of a cabinet for hours and get exposed to, dust or whatever might else, contaminants may be out there, or somebody like, as they're pulling it out, it scrapes along their pants or it touches their skin with the face exposed. That's where you really get into a lot of those issues.
What about the part of the ferrule that's not the end face, just the side of the ferrule? Would dirt there cause a misalignment when you plug it in?
Potentially, but that would probably take a pretty sizable chunk of dirt. But there is potential that, if it's on the side, it could end up on the face once it gets inside the transceiver too. So that's always a consideration.
So it's a matter of contamination of just that whole area.
Yeah, I mean, you want to try and keep that cap on as long as possible.
You mentioned earlier, before you mentioned cleaning, you mentioned one of the common causes of issues is just improper installation, I believe.
Yeah.
What other ways are there to install something wrong?
Well, it's not necessarily from the installers. This would be more potentially at the factory. So like, if you buy from a quality fiber manufacturer, they're going to test every patch cord, and there should be an insertion loss card in your package that says, hey, the insertion loss on this connector or on this patch cord is 0.13, and that the connectors have been installed correctly. That's a pretty low insertion loss. It's a quality fiber. A lot of times, if you go to just a mom and pop shop that might do fiber connectivity, they're just going to put the ends on. If it works, great. Well, it works great on a 1 foot, test strip. But if it's connected to another channel that may be contaminated or whatever, like when you talk about the whole channel, you might have 2 1 meter patch cords and say 100 meter trunk in between. It's the cumulative insertion loss that really matters. So if it hasn't been tested correctly and manufactured correctly, your patch cords can really affect the insertion loss and affect the overall connectivity of the channel.
You mentioned accumulation of the total insertion loss based on a sequence of connector interfaces. So that's kind of getting us back to the original question, which is, if you have an SR4 link, for example, you have at 100 gig, it's getting to be where the link budget is kind of tight.
Yeah, it's very tight.
Now, with a lot of the specs for connectors, or maybe the measured performance of an individual, purchased patch cord, what are the considerations? Like, I guess what I'm asking is, how do you predict what your insertion loss is going to be based on, the information that you have from data sheets or test data?
That's kind of where the engineered link kind of comes in. The standard, I believe, is 0.75 dB per connection. So if you have the transceiver to a patch cord, to a patch cord to a patch panel, to structure cable to another patch panel, that's 2 connections. So that would be, just by using the budget, the standard budget would be 1.5, right, dB.
Right. So in that case, you just add linearly.
Yeah, now that's not the way it actually works out, because the connections can be more optimized than 0.75, way more optimized. I think we have some optimized insertion loss products that are, I want to say 0.15 dB or 0.17 dB. So like if you use those connections if you use those patch cords and trunks in your link, you're almost guaranteeing that the insertion loss is going to be within the budget, especially if it's 3 dB. If it's, some of them are getting even lower than that now, then you really start to have to start thinking about the using the optimized um, insertion loss products, because it just, especially if you're having a multitude of patch panels, you really have to use that optimized fiber to really make sure that that link is going to stay within the link budget.
Okay, so even at 3 dB, you're saying without having to go to specially optimized products, connectivity products, 3 dB, you can still get a fair number of fiber interfaces in there?
Yeah, you can. I mean, basically, by standard budget, you could have 6 connections, right? But
That's 6
some of
times
them are,
0.75.
yeah,
Wait,
yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, 4. Sorry, 4.
4 times 0.75.
It used to be 6.
Okay.
Yeah, 4
Okay.
is, yeah, it's 4 links now. So
okay, but you're saying in reality, because the actual performance of commercial connectors is much better than the 0.75 that's assumed in the standard.
yeah. Now, some of the standards are even really, or the proposals are tightening up to even like in the ones now. So, that's going to be when it becomes more and more required, almost, that you're doing an engineered link, especially on longer multi-mode fiber runs, because that's just going to become more and more prevalent.
Meaning 1 dB total insertion loss budget?
I don't know that it's gotten down to 1, but in the ones. So like 1.5, 1.7.
Okay.
Those are some of the proposals that are out there.
Okay. And can you clarify what you mean by engineered link?
Sure. Yeah. So it's just basically when you have an engineered link, you basically have just you've engineered it to optimize the insertion loss of the connectors. So, for instance, you've used, as good a fiber as you can use. You have the readings that the factory sent you, so hey, this patch cord is 0.17 dB, and the other one's 0.18, and the trunk in between is, say like 0.5 or whatever it might be. So like, hey, we're pretty close, like to 1, say, with this connection. Maybe we're like just slightly above 1 dB, but you want to record that, and you want to think about it. Mainly the engineered link is just thinking about the insertion loss as you're building it.
So basically taking the information you have on paper and adding up the numbers before you actually deploy.
Yeah, absolutely. And then hoping that the guy installs it correctly and doesn't, wipe his French fry fingers all over the face of the.
Don't come straight from the barbecue.
Yeah. Wash your hands and and take the cap off as late as possible before you plug it in.
And when you're doing this paper calculation, do you add up all the insertion loss numbers just because they've been measured?
Yeah, I mean, you obviously want to take the measured insertion loss information that comes with the fiber, but then you can also take a insertion loss on the connection itself and just kind of understand how they align.
I mean, what if you haven't bought your patch cords yet and you just have like a data sheet from the patch cord vendor? It's probably a worst case insertion loss, right?
Well, if it's installed correctly, yeah, that should be the worst case. It's more theoretical, I guess, at that point. Theoretically, it should work. Now, the only way you can really tell is like if you put a tester on it to get the insertion loss. But
so I was just wondering if there's any technique where you can add up in like an RMS way, like a root mean square kind of thing, or if there's you just add up the numbers straight.
Yeah, it would pretty much just be adding up the insertion loss in the whole channel. Okay. And sometimes remember too, I mean, you might have multiple patch panels in there, so it could be multiple connections that you have to add up there.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we beat that to death. Yeah, but it is something that's, I don't know. For some reason it
does. It really, it's one of those secret things that can get you, especially with these higher speeds and lower loss budgets.
Yeah. Okay. Another thing that's kind of a gotcha for, I know from my experience, for a lot of people, breakouts. That was the third part of my conversation with Brian Kelly. Next time we'll get into breakouts. Subscribe to this podcast, and we'd really appreciate you helping to get the word out. Share this with friends and colleagues that come to mind when you think of network technology and optics. And leave a review on Apple Podcast, formerly known as iTunes. We're also on all the other major podcast platforms. You may see Cisco Podcast Network come up when you search for Cisco Optics Podcast. That's where we live, and you can find other great podcasts there too. Also check out the Cisco Optics blogs at blogs.cisco.com and search on hashtag Cisco Optics blog, no spaces, no hyphens. We also have educational videos on YouTube. Just go to youtube.com and search on Cisco Optics. Thank you for listening. This is Pat Chow, Product Manager at Cisco Optics. The next episode is part 4 of my conversation with Brian Kelly. Until next time.